We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
With President Biden trying to distract America from the disastrous stewardship of his Afghanistan withdrawal by laying out a 6-point COVID strategy, the Fourth Estate seems to have swallowed the distraction willingly, but not so the American people. The president's approval numbers are way down on everything from overall performance to dealing with the economy, immigration, and even COVID, especially now that it seems infection rates are up over 300% since last Labor Day. And the backdrop for this saga of a presidential crisis? The 20th anniversary of 9/11, a moment that changed not only the world, but the very way in which we live and behave. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Today's show is a very special one. We'll be sitting down with Tim Donner to discuss the bookends of 9/11 and the Afghanistan withdrawal. Dave Patterson will be here to guide us through the madness that is the unspoken hostage situation at the hands of the Taliban. And we'll be delving into the big lie of Joe Biden as a jobs president and talking liberty with Scott DeCrescenzo. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can get podcasts, breaking news and analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. We've got a lot to cover, so come along for the ride. All the truth with zero spin. It's been 20 long years since that fateful day in New York when the world as a whole first realized that we're not as safe as we once thought we were, that terror could enter our lives in the blink of an eye, and that our way of life may never be the same again. Have those scars begun to heal, or have recent events torn off the scab and made the feelings we had on that day afresh again? We're fortunate to be joined by longtime host of Liberty Nation Radio and senior political analyst for Liberty Nation, Mr. Tim Donner. Thanks for being here, Tim.
Thank you, Mark.
So, Tim, what state is the American psyche in? Have the people recovered from the wounds inflicted in New York City 20 years ago? Or have recent events brought back old memories and pains and they're back to the surface?
Well, you know, I was in both places that were struck on September 11th, Mark, of course, because I live around Washington and I had business and I have family in New York. And I was there that day. And one of the things that struck me the most was how people recognized immediately that the world would never be the same. They realized this was a point of demarcation, that the September 10th world had been left behind. The September 11th world was now with us, with all the things that implied, not the least of which was a massive Homeland Security operation, which has both protected and threatened our freedoms. I never saw the type of depression writ large among the American people that I saw after that event. My father, for example, was never a person prone to depression, as someone who always liked to laugh. Nobody laughed for weeks. Most people didn't smile for weeks. So it also, though, created a unity like never before, like one we have never seen since, like one that the pandemic should have created when we're fighting a common foe like this. But it created that on September 11th. And I would say that we have gone far enough past September 11th that it's easy to forget the abject terror that we all lived in. And so people do complain, and in many ways rightfully so, about the kind of liberties that have been taken from us through things like the Patriot Act that came after 9/11. But those wounds inflicted, those scars in New York will never go away.
Well, as you point out, there are two areas of time separated by the veil, or the demarcation, you call it, of 9/11, the time before and the time after. Now, Tim, you were, as you say, you were in New York that day, at the pivot point, as it were. Now, if you don't mind, can you tell us your experience of what happened on the ground and how things progressed to change from September 12th?
Well, I'll tell you, I had a story. Everybody's got a story from 9/11, but mine is one to beat the band, because I was in exactly the same spot as I had been on a previous unforgettable, life-changing occasion, world-changing occasion. I was in the Regency Hotel in New York City on November 22nd, 1963, when the waiter came to our table. I was having lunch with my grandparents and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, but the president has just been shot." And of course, the world changed from there. I happened to be staying in that same hotel on the night of September 10th and morning of September 11th. I woke up, heard that the towers had been hit, and realized I was standing at that point, Mark, about 100 feet from where I was sitting 38 years earlier on November 22nd, 1963, when JFK was shot. Now, of course, this sent a shiver up my spine, but there were unforgettable images that went along with this Twilight Zone type story, going to Madison Avenue on a Tuesday afternoon and seeing it empty. The hub, the very symbol of American commerce, Madison Avenue, emptied out with the smoldering ruins about a mile south of there. It was an image nobody will ever forget, and it will never be replicated, hopefully, in anybody's lifetime that we know now.
The Allied nations, they really rallied together to head into Afghanistan, almost as a way of trying to close the lid on 9/11. But that didn't happen. Instead, you might say that every day in what we call the graveyard of empires, Afghanistan was an extension of what happened. Now, has the way that President Biden ended the U.S. involvement over there, not that he ended it, but rather in the manner in which he ended it, has this exacerbated the 9/11 situation, or has it in some way helped close the chapter?
Well, you know, I said earlier that I never saw the type of unity that we had in this country as after 9/11. Never saw it before then, and certainly haven't seen it since, when we've become more divided than ever. A lot of people forget, but I will never forget the hug between bitter enemies, George W. Bush and Tom Daschle, on the floor of the House as Bush was making his speech about 11 days after 9/11. It was an extraordinary moment. Bush and Daschle hugging. We've seen nothing like that since. Equally extraordinary was the way that the world rallied around the United States in a way they hadn't probably, Mark, since World War II, after we helped save Europe and saved civilization. We hadn't seen anything like it, with America being rallied around by the rest of the world, sort of like we're all New Yorkers now. And we certainly haven't seen that since either. But they rushed into Afghanistan because they realized what was at stake, because Europe's a whole lot closer to Afghanistan than the United States is. And everybody felt extremely vulnerable after 9/11 because we didn't know how to react. It had never happened before. And so the natural thing was for all the allies to come together in a moment of unity for mutual defense against this threat, which we had no idea was as great as it turned out to be that day. But perhaps it also wasn't as great. Perhaps they got lucky with the World Trade Center attack.
The U.S. relationship with Afghanistan and the Taliban and other purveyors of terror from the Middle East, it's all gone back to square one, hasn't it? I mean, we're exactly where we were 20 years ago. Now,
Well, yes.
should we expect other elements of the pattern to repeat itself? That's the logical question, isn't it?
Well, I think the most frustrating part of this for people, even more than the withdrawal, looking back on this, because in the fullness of time, we'll see the 20 years of Afghanistan more than we'll see the withdrawal, I hope, because it's a stain on the nation, this withdrawal. But the fact that we got back the very same people that we spent, estimates vary, but maybe $2 trillion, over 2,000 lives, countless thousands wounded, thousands of Afghan lives, lives of others. For what? For this. I think that it's such a shameful episode in the way that the political class handled it through 4 presidents, the way each of them handled it. There was a lot of blame to go around. And I think that it's heartbreaking for people to look at the bookends. We went in to take out the Taliban, and we left being chased out by the very people that helped perpetrate 9/11. It's a mark of shame. It's a mark of tragedy. It's a mark of the utter futility of our foreign policy establishment over these last 20 years. I'd say that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was as apt a conclusion to this ugly episode as the Saigon rescue was to Vietnam, the Vietnam War.
Tim Donner, thank you ever so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
Now, don't go anywhere. Later in the show, we'll be discussing a major change in how jury trials work in Arizona in our special Talking Liberty segment. But before that, after this short break, we'll be back with Dave Patterson to figure out why the stranded folks in Afghanistan are hostages in all but name. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.